Zullen we gewoon beginnen?
Ja, lijkt me prima.
Perfect. All right, pardon our Dutch, everybody. Thank you for joining. Really cool to be here at the Runecast webinars. Great way to pass the time, I guess, while we're all working at home. So in this session, Johan and myself will be talking about a use case, really cool use case that Johan was working on. There's a lot of stuff going into the VMware technology side from a GPU side, everything, and how that will come together in a quite an amazing use case. We have some tech preview stuff in it, so there is still a disclaimer in this slide deck. And we'll hit it off with a short introduction. The GPU, why do we want to use a GPU? How do we expose a GPU in vSphere to? How do we expose it to workloads? Then, like I said, we'll bring everything together in a customer case, and we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end of the session as well. As for a short introduction, I am Niels Hagoort. I live in the Netherlands. In my daily role, I'm a tech marketing architect at VMware. I'm basically covering everything vSphere ESXi. So that's resource management, that's ESXi architecture, that is hardware compatibility and hardware accelerators, stuff that we are going to discuss today as well. And you might have seen some of the books that I co-authored with Frank and Duncan, the host resources deep dive and clustering deep dive. Johan, if you want to present yourself.
Yep, absolutely. So my name is Johan van Amersfoort. Like Niels, I'm a VCDX as well, VCDX 238, with a strong focus on desktop and mobility. I'm a technologist in the EUC and AI space at ITQ Consultancy in the Benelux. And I released a book called the VDI Design Guide about 2 years ago, which covers a lot in the, mostly, of course, VDI space, but also a lot around graphical acceleration. One of the things that we're going to talk about today. So there's a reason why this picture of me and Niels is blurred. And we presented this session a couple of times now, and we always ask the question, who in the audience is 100% sure that at the left, that's me, and at the right, that's Niels? And there's always, not everyone is 100% confident. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. Next slide, Niels. So let's dig into GPUs and a little bit of the why. So there's a history of GPUs. And this actual GPU is the first GPU. It's a Fujitsu MB14241, and it's the world's first video display controller. It had a blazing 16 KB of VRAM and was able to produce 4 whole colors. And we have a little demo of what a game looked like with that video controller. See that frame rate? That's awesome, right? So the first iconic GPU that came like 20 years after that was this one. And for who might recognize this is the Voodoo one, the Monster Voodoo one. And to me, this is sure it's the real iconic first GPU, because this was the first GPU that made a difference in a real specific use case. And that use case was to offload specific things from an API to hardware. What you see here is a game, and this is Quake 2. And Quake 2 in this case is played through soft 3D. So no dedicated GPU is used to render certain textures or to offload things from an API to the card. And in this picture, you can see the actual result when you do offload those textures and those API calls to a card. And the main reason, or one of the main reasons to use a card like this is to have a better gameplay and to make the textures a bit smoother and let the game run a bit faster and have a better user experience. But I honestly think that the biggest reason for using a card like this is to reduce latency. And everyone who plays a first-person shooter on an occasional basis knows that latency is the one thing that either gets you killed or let you kill someone else in a game. Right, so let's jump ahead 20 years in time. Or yeah, I think like 10, 15 years maybe. Now you see the same game. This is exactly the same game. It's Quake 2, but it's a specific, a special edition of Quake 2 that was released last year by Nvidia. It's free to download, by the way. It's Quake 2 RTX. And Quake 2 RTX basically is the same game, but it uses a different card and additional APIs to offload specific things from the game to the card. And one of those things is what we call ray tracing. Ray tracing is a technology that that dynamically calculates light, the lighting in the game. So you see a little bit of sunburst through the roof coming in, and you can see that the actual light beams are coming into the building, as well as a bit of lighting on the gun. And if you take a movie like Toy Story, which is an old movie, but it was one of the first movies that was actually fully rendered through computers and through GPUs. Every single frame of that movie took a couple of days to render. And through the technology that we have right now, such as real-time ray tracing, which is part of the GPU architecture, we can do the same thing real-time. And that really shows the power of GPUs and the development we have seen in the last 20 years. Right, so how, GPU for a game is fun, but we also use GPUs a lot in our daily lives, and sometimes we hardly even know it. And of course, on a MacBook or a Windows laptop or some other physical machine, you know that there's a GPU because you need a display output. But if you look at smart things like a phone, that has a GPU as well. Niels, could you? Yeah, awesome. But it has a GPU for one thing. That's obviously to display the output, but also a GPU to do some form of AI. Because if you talk to Siri like you would do on a smartwatch, thanks for clicking, Niels. Siri answers back, and before Siri answers back, Siri needs to perform some form of calculation to translate speech into text, from text into a command. The command executes and produces some form of text back, which needs to be translated to speech again. Doing that through CPUs is a real challenge in getting the result back in time. Through a GPU, you can almost do that in an instant, like we basically know by using Siri or Google Assistant or some form of other assistant in our daily lives. Another device is a Raspberry Pi. It has a GPU and sure to display an output, but also to encode video streams. A car has a GPU, and in this case, you're looking at a Volvo console, and the display in the console has obviously the output and shows things like music, but also your sat nav and stuff like that. But also another thing that the GPU does in a car is perform calculations. And my car is a Alfa Romeo. It has a GPU, and it warns me, for instance, if a bicyclist, and we have a lot of those in the Netherlands, passes by and I missed the bicyclist, it'll warn me just before I possibly get into an accident that the bicyclist is passing by. And that's also one of the things that a GPU is responsible for. And the last thing, and this is something that runs in my lab as well, is Synology DS918. And this is actually a device with a GPU, but it lacks a display output. So in this case, the only reason why the GPU is used is to perform encoding and a bit of calculation by the software that runs in the DS918. Yeah, I think from how we use GPUs in our daily lives, it's a great way to see how they perform in a data center.
All right, thank you, Johan. So like Johan said, we have seen GPU applications in a lot of devices, a lot of stuff, but we also see GPUs becoming more and more mainstream in the data center as well. And these are particularly general purpose GPUs, GPUs. And we use those for non-graphical calculations as well. Think about high performance computing platforms, right? Machine learning, workloads, artificial intelligence, basically all the workloads that are using matrix multiplications and other math, right? Because a GPU, what it does for us is it'll give us a high degree of parallelism, and we'll dig a little bit deeper in what that actually means. But why use that GPU, right? It is really the question of latency versus throughput. Where you see a common CPU package, and depending on make and model, you would probably see a CPU package running up to 28 or maybe even 64 cores with the latest AMD CPU packages. But still, if you compare that to a GPU, for example, you'll instantly see the difference in the number of cores on one single package or one device, right? When you look at the current flagship offering with Nvidia, the Tesla V100, we're talking in the excess of 5,000 cores on one PCIe device. And you can have multiple PCIe devices on one system as well, right? But it's not only about the number of cores. We are talking memory setup here as well. If you look at a high-level CPU architecture, again, really depending on make and model, but this is a high-level overview. You see the cores, a number of cores, and within those cores, you'll have a level 1 cache, L1 data cache, and L2 cache. And those are dedicated to a core. So this already shows you that a CPU, for doing computations, wants to have the data as close by as possible. Because in a CPU, computations will be done sequentially, right? So it really needs to shift between computational workloads, and it'll need the data for those computations fast. So if data is not residing on level 1 or L2 cache, it'll reach out to L3 or last level cache, which is a caching layer that spans all the cores in the CPU package. In the end, if data isn't even there, it'll reach out to the system agent, memory controller, and to the global system memory. That is obviously the way, the slowest way of getting data from a memory perspective. The thing about the CPU is that we schedule tasks on a per core basis, right? Or a SMT, a hyperthread. The biggest difference with a GPU is not only that memory setup, because the memory setup we just talked about with the CPU is all about having a lowest possible latency, where a GPU architecture allows for a air quote memory latency, right? It hides the memory latency a bit because we are keeping the cores at work. So we'll see some level 1 caches across the device. We'll have a shared level 2 cache, and basically all the screen buffering is done in GDDR5, or with newer cards, even GDDR6 memory, which is a lot faster. But still, it is about the cores in this specific example for the high throughput, because we don't schedule on a per core basis. We'll schedule against a processor cluster, which contains multiple streaming multiprocessors, which then contains a lot of CPU cores, or GPU cores. So you'll have the access to thousands of cores for doing calculations, right, for your workload. So that is the throughput versus latency difference between a CPU and a GPU. I want to go quickly over some machine learning terminology that you might hear us talk about, and you might have seen this in the field as well. Something that is probably the most important framework today for machine learning, and it is a framework used to offload computations to a GPU device, is CUDA. the Compute Unified Device Architecture, which is developed by Nvidia. And basically all the GPU utilization by machine learning workloads is done using the CUDA framework, possibly extended by the TensorFlow framework, which has optional CUDA extensions. But TensorFlow itself is developed by Google. And we also see OpenCL, the Open Computing Language. Now, this is more in the FPGA space and an upcoming framework. We don't see that being used that often today. So why are GPUs for machine learning such a good fit? We just talked about parallelism and high throughput for a GPU device. But I just wanted to show you what is happening inside a machine learning application. And this is just an example, right? Just to show you the number of calculations that are going on. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the axis, the green dots, which is basically the input. And you'll see on the right-hand side, the Y's, which is the output. And in between, you'll see the neural network nodes, because this is an example of a deep learning algorithm. And all these nodes are connected to each other, right? And to give you an example, each and every node, and there can be thousands or millions maybe, depending on workload, each and every neural network node is potentially doing a calculation like this. Again, just an example, but you'll have the same axis, the inputs. You'll have the W's, the weight values. In the end, you'll see a sum identified by the sigma symbol and an activation function that is applied to that specific sum. And the weight values keep changing over time. And the activation function, the F, is giving it non-linearity in the neural network. In the end, you'll have output, and that same output is again used, hence the deep learning is again used as input, right? So this is a continuous cycle. So a lot of computations going on. And just to show you a better example of what that actually looks like, this is a TensorFlow, TensorRT image recognition workflow running on the Skylake CPU, right? Notice the images per second of just over 4, which is not a whole lot. So same workload, but now utilizing a GPU at Tesla V100 in this specific example, and you'll see the images per second that are processed by this machine learning workload, this deep learning workload, close to 900 even, right? So this is the whole idea why we want to utilize GPUs for machine learning workloads like these. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper in how to expose a GPU device to a workload running on vSphere. And we have multiple options. So we see the need for full GPUs dedicated to one virtual machine. And just to keep it in the machine learning space, this might be a workload, and the data scientist is like, hey, I need that computational power for one virtual machine. Hit me up with a full GPU. And we can do that with direct path IO or Nvidia VGPU. We also have the option to have even more GPUs attached to one single workload, one single virtual machine, right? And we can do so with dynamic direct path IO, Bitfusion, and Nvidia VGPU again. Notice the wildcards, by the way. We introduced Nvidia VGPU, the multiple GPU usage in vSphere 6.7 update 3, and the dynamic direct path IO is introduced in vSphere 7. We'll discuss that in a later slide. The last option is probably something, well, it's something that we did for compute resources as well. So carve up physical resources and share them amongst multiple virtual machines or workloads, right? And we can do that again with Bitfusion and Nvidia VGPU. Let's dig a little bit deeper in all these various options. First of all, direct path IO. Some of you might be familiar with direct path IO. It's a pretty common feature that has been around for quite some years. And what it is that we connect the hardware address of a PCIe device directly into the VMX file, the configuration file of a virtual machine, so that the guest and application running inside the virtual machine can utilize that PCIe device. And it brings, bare metal performance, right? Because you're not sharing that PCIe device, but it comes with a lot of constraints when we look at vSphere features, especially availability, because the hardware address is mapped directly to that virtual machine. We no longer have the ability for that virtual machine to be moved to another ESXi host, right? Requires a lot of manual intervention, manual provisioning and configuration. To overcome those challenges, we came up with dynamic direct path I/O. And this is something that we introduced in vSphere 7. So no longer are we coupling the hardware address from the PCIe device directly into the virtual machine, but we have a sort of capability mapping in between. So we will expose a PCIe device capability to the virtual machine, making it a lot easier, and now reintroducing ways to migrate that virtual machine to another ESXi host. And that is all part of the new assignable hardware framework in vSphere 7. So basically, we see two consumers of assignable hardware. That is dynamic direct path I/O and Nvidia VGPU. Now, the beauty of this is, like I said, with dynamic direct path I/O, we have a certain capability that the virtual machine is configured with, right? And that is, for example, a GPU model V100, a Tesla V100 of Nvidia. Or when using Nvidia VGPU, it's a specific VGPU profile. Now, whatever is configured for that virtual machine, DRS, assignable hardware, will now interact with DRS and find a suitable host to run this virtual machine. So it will check if a host has a specific device capable that adheres to the capability mapping that we configured the virtual machine with. If it finds a device that is available, it'll now register that virtual machine to that host, connect that device, and power it on, right? Basically, everything we needed to do before manually, DRS will now do that for you. Also, in the event of host loss with vSphere HA, high availability, we now at least have the option to have this virtual machine recovered at a surviving ESXi host, right? So great new feature with vSphere 7. And if you look at it from a UI perspective, this is what it looks like. So what I wanted to point out here is that we also have a hardware label. So we have the device name, so the GV100, which is the Tesla V100, but we also can configure a hardware label. Now, whenever we go to the virtual machine that is running VM hardware version 17, because that is required to use assignable hardware, we will now have the option for dynamic direct path I/O as well. And you see that we can select that PCIe device, that Tesla V100, also using a hardware label. Now, the beauty of this is that we can also configure slightly different types of GPUs with the same hardware label. Maybe we have another GPU that is also capable of doing computational workloads. We can also configure that with a hardware label of GPU, and now it'll run in the same pool as this Tesla V100, right? So giving a lot more freedom to DRS and assignable hardware to claim that device and connect it to that virtual machine. And the last option that we have is Bitfusion. Now, you might have heard about Bitfusion. We acquired that technology in that company last year. And what it is, it's basically a client-server model for GPUs. This is a way in which we can virtualize a GPU. The beauty of this is that the Bitfusion server in the diagram on the right-hand side is a virtual appliance that has GPUs or other hardware accelerators connected to it, right? Using, for instance, dynamic direct path I/O. Now, on the left-hand side, we see the Bitfusion client. That could be either a Linux virtual machine or perhaps even a bare metal server running Linux. Obviously, we prefer a virtual machine. Whenever those client VMs are running machine learning workloads and they are in the need of a GPU for their CUDA workload, for their CUDA machine learning workload or something like that, we can now remote those instructions, those CUDA instructions, over the network fabric to the Bitfusion server itself. Now, think about this as sending over a computation. The computation will be done at the server level, and it'll give back the results, right? Still, we have some requirements on the network part, and especially if you require a really low latency line, we do support paravirtual or just pass-through RDME devices as well. RDME as in remote direct memory access. And this helps a great deal in A, saving CPU cycles, and B, lowering latency on a network fabric. So this is a data flow overview of what that looks like. So you have the application on the left-hand side, right? The client application side, and you'll see that the application is integrated with the Nvidia CUDA libraries. Now, Bitfusion is the Bitfusion client, which is just an executable. Will intercept the CUDA instructions that are sent over or that are used in the application, and will intercept those, package those, and basically send them over the network to the GPU, to the server, the Bitfusion server side. Now, the beauty of Bitfusion is not only to intercept those API calls, those CUDA API calls, but also we do a lot of optimizations on the network part as well. So we have insight in the CUDA operations, right? So we can bundle certain instructions together, we can prioritize, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just pushing it out on a network fabric and we'll receive it on the server side. No, there's actually a lot of intelligence going on that part as well, all to lower the latency and to give a best user experience possible. At the server side, like we discussed, we'll unpack basically the CUDA instructions that we captured on the client side. We'll use that GPU and do the calculations, and we'll send back the results to the application on the client side. This is just a quick overview and just to show you that we can do full GPU sharing, right? We can assign, in this specific instance, multiple GPUs to a data scientist running its workload. And on the same side, we might have a data scientist that has a requirement for just one GPU, right? The same thing, but now to carve up one GPU device. So running a Bitfusion server VM with just one GPU, same thing happens, but now this data scientist with the blue dots is claiming 66% of that GPU, where the other data scientists is claiming the remaining 33% of that GPU. So a lot of freedom of carving up one GPU or assigning multiple GPUs to the data scientists. Let me quickly hop over to another screen just to show you what Bitfusion is and how it actually works. We saw the conceptual part. Now let's check out what is happening. This is just an example, just a data set that you can download for free, which is about dogs and specific races, and how a machine learning workload can actually be trained to check what dog it actually is, right? So for this test, we set up a TensorFlow dog classifier virtual machine, and that is running in a general purpose cluster, running ESXi hosts that are not equipped with a GPU. And we'll see the GPU2 cluster, which is running the Bitfusion server VMs. And those hosts are equipped with multiple Tesla T4s in this specific example. So we already had a benchmark, that the TensorFlow benchmark workload running. And notice that we only had 0.7 images per second, right? So we'll quickly abandon this test run. And we'll do exactly the same thing. This is a Python script. And this is all about kicking off that workload, right? The TensorFlow benchmark. But now we will use FlexDirect to run this same command, and we'll offload it to a Bitfusion server. The N is actually saying that we need 2 GPUs because that's in the command as well. So we'll go with that. And from those 2 GPUs, we might just want to partially use them up to 60%, right? So this is it. This is the client part of the Bitfusion server solution. So now this is pretty cool because we see a lot of text flowing by, but we are now offloading those CUDA instructions to the server VM, right? So this is the Bitfusion, the server UI. And we see a couple of interesting things. First of all, we see the Bitfusion servers, right? We have 4 of them. And in this specific case, we are using the one server VM that now has 2 GPUs allocated for 60%. And on the client side, we see the same thing. Our CentOS virtual machine running the doc classifier, and that is the client that is using those GPUs, right? Beauty of Bitfusion is whenever that workload is done, it'll free up those GPUs because now another data scientist or another application can utilize those GPUs. So again, a lot of freedom in GPU utilization across the data center. And we'll quickly go back and we see that the total images per second is now over 200, right? So again, just to show you that GPUs do matter in workloads like these. All right, that's it for the demo. Let's go quickly over the last option that we have, and that is Nvidia VGPU. Now, Nvidia VGPU, you saw it coming by a couple of times, basically is you need a GPU that is from Nvidia and it's supported for VGPU. You'll install a VIP, a kernel module on the ESXi layer. This is where the extra additional Nvidia scheduling is done because you can carve up a GPU giving a specific amount of buffer size to a specific workload. And the workload itself is equipped with that CUDA instruction, that CUDA framework, and a driver for that specific GPU. One of the great things about NVIDIA vGPU is that we already have some portability support, right? So in 6.7, we already supported suspend and resume. In 6.7 update 1, we added vMotion to that. So that is pretty cool. Just to live migrate a virtual machine that is using GPU resources. And this overview is to quickly show you that update versions of vSphere is not only about bug fixes or patches or whatever, it's also about new additional features. And especially with hardware accelerators, it's more important than ever before to run a latest, preferably even vSphere 7, to have the fullest support for your hardware accelerators. And about vMotion vGPU, with vGPU, we have a demo, Johan, if you will.
Yep, and I found the request remote control button.
Nice.
Awesome. So if all goes well, I should be able to start the demo. Yes, there we go. So you're looking at a virtual desktop, and the virtual desktop has a vGPU profile. It's a T4 8Q, which you can see at the right. And we are remotely signed into that virtual machine. So close the remote desktop analyzer, which is a free tool. Open up basically two browsers. One at the left has YouTube, and the one at the right has my lab. We're signed on to the virtual machine called YOLO, and it's running at ESXi 2. As you can see, there's the profile. And at the left, we'll start a video, and it's one of the videos that is on the ITQ Lightboard YouTube channel. So this is fully running. And what we'll do now, there's me and Niels talking about awesome stuff, CPUs, GPUs. And at the right, we'll select the machine, say migrate, change the compute resources, select a different host. It was running on 2, so we're going to go to 3. Select next, schedule with high priority, and finish. So at the status bar in the vCenter client, you can see that it's relocating. And if you look at the left, you'll see the video briefly freeze right now. At the right, you'll see the machine copying. It's at 51%. And at the left, in a couple of seconds, you'll see the video continuing again. And at the right, you can see that the actual machine is almost finished with copying. Well, there's a brief freeze, which has to do obviously with the frame buffer, which is DDR6. And the frame buffer is the physical video memory. It needs to be copied to the other side. And in order to sync that fast DDR6 memory from one host to another. It needs a tiny freeze, a small freeze, in order to sync the memory pages. Right. So that was a cool demo, right? So what we're gonna do now is, and this should, yes, we're gonna go to a customer case, and this will contain demos. So I've been involved with a project for a large bioimaging facility in a large oncology research hospital in the Netherlands. And that oncology hospital has been working with innovative technologies for the last like 30 years. They were the first to use modern microscopes and other types of devices to basically create more data and to create better data, obviously to get cancer out of the world. And since they've been working with, a lot of data for the last 30 years, they also have been working with, data scientists for the last 30 years. And 30 years ago, they might have looked like this, like angry men with beards. And they probably performed most of their calculations on ancient CPUs like this one. This is the Intel C4004. And this is the actual first CPU that was created with the architecture, the CPU architecture that we currently still use. So the x86 architecture. And nowadays, they do the same types of calculations, but more complex, and they need more hardware to do so. And they probably do that in massive data centers like this. And the data center you're looking at right now is the Mare Nostrum 4 supercomputer, and it's located in a data center in Barcelona. And it's awesome because of a couple of reasons. One being that it's built in a church. The second reason that it's fully equipped with GPUs. And the last reason, and that's probably, it's one of my personal best reasons, is that it's perfectly OCD compliant. So you see that every host is connected with the same type of cable, the same coloring of cable. The cable lengths are all pretty much perfectly adjusted. So, it looks really, really, really nice. But, let's go back to the oncology research center. And if you see what has happened in the last 30 years, it's a couple of things. And we're looking at the numbers specifically to the Netherlands. And the number of cancer diagnoses has doubled in the last 30 years. So we had the double number of diagnoses. We had a massive increase of the amount of bioimaging data. Pictures taken with a microscope or with an MRI device or with a sonogram. It is so easy to create a picture nowadays. And if you look at yourself, and we'll cover that later on, if you take a picture, the ease you can take a picture with your smartphone right now is so it's so easy that it totally makes sense to that the number of data or the amount of data has increased as well as the level of data of detail of these individual images, because of better optics, but also because of better sensors of, for instance, a microscope. An image 30 years ago or 10 years ago of a digital microscope could be like 15 megabytes, and nowadays it could easily be a couple of terabytes for a single image. Right, so how does that impact bioimaging? And this is a question to the audience. So have you ever taken a picture that was blurred because, the object moved too quickly? I have, and Niels probably too. So remember this picture, me and Niels? Well, let's dive a bit into some stuff related to this picture. So if you have, instead of like the picture you saw with the two massive 6'5" objects, you have more objects. So maybe, 30, 40. Those objects, instead of 6'5", they're just 20 nanometers in size. And to give you an idea, 20 nanometers is 1/50,000th of a millimeter, which is really tiny. And instead of these two massive objects, which try to stand still, are constantly moving, And the focal length, if I take a picture of my iPhone, everything is sharp. But the focal length of a microscope is so tiny that one single cancer cell, and you're looking at cancer cells at the left, doesn't really fit within the focal length of a single picture. So you need multiple pictures to have everything in focus. And those multiple pictures are based on layers. A cell is not just a single 2D object. It's like a square, or it's an orb, or it's some other form, and it's in 3D. So you need to have multiple pictures of that object to have it full in the image. And the goal is to bring back as much scientific data as possible. And remember the question I asked at the beginning around, like, who is 100% confident that it was me at the left and Niels at the right? A data scientist doesn't assume anything. So they want scientific data and use that scientific data for research. And assumptions are deadly in this case. Right, so what if we know, based on these pictures, the speed of the moving objects? So Niels and I were moving, the camera is moving. So the speed of the moving camera as well. We know the distance between the individual objects, so between Niels and me, but also between the camera, Niels and me. We know the shutter speed of the camera. We know the aperture size of the camera. We know the type of lens that was used. And then suddenly, it's not me and Niels, or it's not me and Niels, it's Niels and me. And this process is what we call deconvolution, bringing the scientific data back from a picture. Right, so now it's demo time, and we have really awesome demo lined up. So this is a solution called Huygens Remote Manager. What we can do with that solution is run a deconvolution job distributedly. So we select a microscopic image of 4 cancer cells, and we add that to the process. We select a microscope profile dedicated to the type of microscope that was used. We select the type of machine learning framework that is used to deconvolve this type of image. Finally, we check if everything was set up correctly, and we run the actual process. So we go to the queue. You can see that my job was queued. So at the left, you can see the output of the framework, almost. And at the right, you can see the 4 different processes that are linked to the GPU. The above 2 are Xorg and GNOME shell. You can see that those are, if you look at the type, those are both graphical type of processes. And the 2 processes at the bottom are ucore.bin. And those are computational processes, hence the C in the type column. You can see at the right that the frame buffer is slowly filling the physical video memory. And at the left, you can see that the actual process is doing something, and it's performing that on the GPU. As you can see now, processing on GPU. Right, so what we'll do now is we'll jump a little bit to some more information, and then we'll see the end of the demo in a couple of minutes. So SVI made this solution. They're the global leader in microscopic image optimization. They built a solution called Huygens to deconvolve those microscopic images. And they open sourced the multi-node distributed training, or the distributed deconvolution solution called HRM. And it's fully optimized for CUDA. And that's important to know. Right, so we did some tests up front, and to show you the difference between CPUs and GPUs. So the image that we used, that you saw in the demo, is a confocal microscopic image of 4 different cancer cells. It's 1.2 gigs in size, and please know that this is a crop. So the original image contained around 50 different cells, but we just took a crop of 4 images, or 4 cells. So the image contains 51 layers, and we tested the deconvolution algorithm on different types of resources. And in this graph, you can see the different resources at the bottom and the deconvolution time at the left. So on a Xeon D, an Intel Xeon D, which is running in my lab, the deconvolution test process took around 130 seconds, so a little over 2 minutes. On a dual E5 2680 V2, it took 30 seconds. And on an E5 2667 V3, just little or a little bit less than 30 seconds. In all three cases, all of the CPU resources were fully in use by the deconvolution process. Now use the same algorithm but running on a Tesla P4. It took 14.14 seconds. Do the same thing on a T4 and it took 10.8 seconds. And the logical explanation is that a P4 has DDR5 memory and a T4 has DDR6 memory. But also know that the card was in use and that was it. So the CPU resources were obviously being used, but not in the same way as if we would run the deconvolution process on CPUs only. And if you add like multiple of these GPUs to a single host, you can run 3 to 6 of the same deconvolution tasks on a host without any noticeable delay. Right, so if you look at the architecture, we have a microscope with an engineer that runs the microscope. We have people working with the HRM web server. And we have a queuing manager between the web server and what we call the HRM nodes. So these are the workers with the GPU attached. So if a job is processed, the result is being presented back to the HRM web server, and users can access the result. If you look at how the vGPU architecture works, the HRM nodes have vGPU profiles, a 16C profile to be specific, and the nodes have direct access to the frame buffer, so to the physical video memory. And the GPU scheduler that sits between the vGPU profile and the actual hardware GPU scheduled the tasks, and we specifically use the equal share scheduler, which we'll cover a little bit later on as well. Or now, to be specific. There are a couple of design considerations to be taken. One is obviously to choose the right type of GPU for the job. Niels mentioned the V100 a couple of times, and we mentioned the T4 and the P4 as well. Not all GPUs are equipped with the same amount of CUDA cores, and some of them have tensor cores, some don't. If you know what type of job you have, please, contact contact Nvidia or your partner to talk about the type of GPU that you would like to use. Equal share or fixed share schedulers are the preferred ways of preferred schedulers to use in case of computational workloads, and that's because both of them are equipped with QoS features. The equal share would be used in most cases, and fixed share could be used in case of if you would like to offer GPUs as a service. And finally, NVIDIA released the vCompute server last year, which is an offering specifically built for computational workloads. And it'll save you a lot of money in terms of licensing. So let's get to the deconvolution result. So we were running the demo of HRM. At the left, you can still see that the demo is running. And at the right, you can see that the 4 processes are still also running. And what you will see in a bit is now a 3rd and the 4th process are being released from the GPU. At the left, you can see that the process ID is being showed, which means that the process itself is has ended. And if all goes well, in a couple of seconds, we'll be able to show the result in the HRM web server. So the job is now finished. And if we go back to the main screen of the HRM web server.
Johan, in the meantime, we're running a little bit late. So,
yeah, we're almost finished.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll go to the result. And what you see here is that the above job is the latest one. This is the actual result. We'll jump into the left was the original file, the right was the result file. And what you can see here is that certain objects within the file are being highlighted. And in this case, the cancer cell or the cancer was found, or the type of cancer sits in specific parts of the cell. And what you can see in a bit right now is that the links between the cells, which are called protein bridges, are the things that were actually highlighted, and that was also the goal of this type of machine learning framework, to highlight those protein bridges and highlight the possible cause of the cancer in this case. Right, so we have some key takeaways. vSphere and GPUs offer a great support, flexibility, and performance for machine learning workloads, also for deep learning, obviously. Again, choose the right hardware and also the vSphere configuration, because like Niels showed you, there are a lot of different possibilities, and they also have different use cases. And finally, depending on the type of workload, vGPU settings need to be tuned. So we have some time for questions, and also please take a look at this URL, because you can download a machine learning GPUs for machine learning vSphere guide for free here, and it's quite comprehensive. So
I know we were running a little bit late. If there aren't any questions, or you think about questions later on, please hit us up on Twitter or whatever channel, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Absolutely.